This is a famous and completely true horror story that will send chills down your spine. It is a story from an ancient town in Italy. This town was well known, where eerie occurrences were common, but for an entire week, something even more terrifying happened. Every night, one man was murdered. By morning, his dead body would be found. Everyone was in deep fear. After 6 p.m., no one dared to leave their homes. Signs were put up outside houses stating, "We do not open the door after 6 p.m. Please come in the morning." Seeing the townspeople so disturbed, a news reporter decided that he would stay up at night and uncover the truth. At 10 p.m., he quietly left his house. The streets were deserted, everything was shut down, and the atmosphere was suffocating. Fear crept into his heart, and he regretted stepping outside. But just a little ahead, he noticed light coming from a house window. He peeked inside and saw a stunningly beautiful woman calling out the name of a man who was sleeping. Her voice was so soothing and hypnotic that the man immediately woke up and sat up. The woman then made him follow her. She walked ahead, and the man followed like he was under a spell. She led him deep into the nearby forest, where she suddenly attacked and brutally killed him. What the reporter saw next made his blood run cold. She devoured his sexual organs. The reporter was watching in absolute terror. As soon as he realized the horrifying truth, he tried to escape. But at that very moment, that same enchanting voice reached his ears, making him feel drowsy. However, unlike the other men, he now knew the truth. Fighting the urge to sleep, he ran with all his strength and leaped over the wall of a nearby house to hide inside. But to his horror, the terrifying woman followed him there too and grabbed his hand before he could escape. Wait. You enjoy watching the video, but you haven't subscribed yet? That's not fair. Hurry up and subscribe now, thank you. We will continue bringing you more stories like this. How did you like the story? Let us know in the comments. It's just a bunch of old wives' tales, the young news reporter scoffed, flipping through the dusty pages of the town's ancient archive. His eyes, however, grew wide as he read the accounts of the eerie events that had plagued this quaint Italian town for centuries. The stories were as persistent as the cobwebs that clung to the corners of every building. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones, their faces drawn tight with fear as they recounted the latest tragedy. Each night, a man was found dead, his body drained of life, and mutilated in a way that sent shivers down even the most stoic of spines. The local authorities were baffled, and whispers of a curse began to echo through the cobblestone streets. Determined to debunk the myths and bring peace to the panicking residents, the reporter decided to patrol the streets after the town's self-imposed curfew. The sun had long set, casting the world in shadows that danced with the flickering candlelight from the few windows that dared to remain open. The chilling silence was only occasionally pierced by the distant howl of a lone wolf, sending tremors through the air. At exactly 10 p.m., the reporter tiptoed out of his lodgings, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The streets lay abandoned, a stark contrast to the vibrant marketplace they had been just hours earlier. Only the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant echo of a shutter banging in the wind broke the oppressive quietude. As he walked, his eyes were drawn to a flicker of light from a nearby house. Curiosity and a journalist's instinct propelled him closer. Pressing his nose to the cool glass, he gasped at the sight within. A woman, more beautiful than any he had ever seen, knelt beside a sleeping man's bed. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and her lips moved in a silent chant that seemed to coax the very air around her. The man stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers. Without a word, she beckoned him with a graceful hand, and like a marionette on invisible strings, he rose and followed her into the night. The reporter's heart raced as he watched the couple disappear into the inky blackness of the forest. He knew he had stumbled upon something sinister, something that defied the logical explanations he sought. With trembling hands, he took out his notebook and scribbled down the grim scene, the words barely legible through his fear. The moon cast a silver glow on the deserted streets as the reporter cautiously approached the house. He had to know the truth. His mind raced with the possibilities. Was it a lover's tryst gone awry? A ritual? Or something far more terrifying? He leaned in, peering through the window pane. The room inside was dimly lit, a single candle flickering on the bedside table. The man lay there, his breathing deep and even, lost in a peaceful slumber. And then she appeared. Her beauty was haunting, her features so delicate they seemed sculpted from marble by an unseen hand. She leaned over the sleeping man, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The reporter's hand clenched around the window sill, his knuckles turning white, as he watched, unable to look away. The woman began to sing, her voice a sweet, siren's lullaby that seemed to coil around the man's very soul. The man on the bed stirred, his eyes fluttering open to meet hers. She reached out, her fingertips grazing his cheek, and whispered a name. The man's eyes snapped open, and he sat up, as if pulled by invisible threads. His gaze remained fixed on the woman, his expression one of pure adoration. She stood, her movements fluid and graceful, and the reporter watched, his breath held, as she guided the man out of the house. Their path led them into the heart of the forest that surrounded the town. The trees loomed tall, their branches twisting and entwining to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The only illumination was the flickering candle the woman held, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ground. The reporter followed from a safe distance, his heart hammering in his chest like a caged bird desperate to break free. Once they had ventured far enough from the safety of the town's borders, the woman's demeanor shifted. Her eyes grew dark, and a sinister smile curled her lips. The man, still under her spell, walked with a strange grace that seemed unnatural. The reporter felt a knot tighten in his stomach, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But the need for answers, the thirst for truth, kept him pressing onward. Suddenly, the woman stopped. She turned to face the man, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. The reporter held his breath, his eyes wide with horror, as he realized she had led her victim to a clearing, a place where the moon could fully cast its pale glow. The air grew thick with a sense of dread, and the reporter felt the weight of countless unspoken secrets pressing down upon him. With a swiftness that belied her ethereal grace, the woman's hand shot out and grabbed the man by the neck. He didn't even have time to scream before she sank her teeth into his flesh, tearing away at his throat. The reporter stumbled back, his stomach lurching as he watched the woman feast, her eyes never leaving her prey's terrified gaze. When she was finished, she dropped the lifeless body to the ground, blood staining her perfect skin. The woman looked up, her eyes locking with the reporter's. He tried to flee, but his legs felt like lead. Her beauty was a mask, and beneath it lay a monster, a creature of unspeakable hunger and darkness. She began to approach him, the candle casting elongated shadows that stretched and grew with each step she took. He stumbled through the forest, the woman's hypnotic voice echoing through the trees. It was as if she was weaving a web of sleep around him, and he knew that if he didn't find shelter soon, he would become her next meal. The town's warnings echoed in his mind, the desperate pleas of the townsfolk now a stark reality. As he reached the edge of the forest, the reporter spotted a house, its windows boarded up, a relic of fear long ago. He leaped over the crumbling wall, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He had to get inside to find refuge from the creature that pursued him. But just as he thought he had escaped, he felt a cold, firm grip on his hand. The woman's eyes bore into him, her beauty now a twisted mockery of humanity. The reporter's mind raced, trying to think of a way to break her spell. He knew he couldn't outrun her, couldn't outsmart her, he had to find a weakness, something she hadn't anticipated. With a burst of strength, fueled by pure terror, he yanked his hand free and sprinted towards the house, the sound of her laughter chasing him like a ghostly wind. His lungs burned, and his legs felt like they might give out, but the adrenaline kept him moving. He slammed into the door, the wood giving way with a splintering crack. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. The furniture was overturned, the walls adorned with faded tapestries that bore the images of grotesque beasts feasting on human flesh. The reporter stumbled through the darkness, tripping over forgotten relics of a life once lived. His eyes searched frantically for anything that might serve as a weapon. He heard her footsteps, soft and deliberate, as she approached the house. The candle in her hand cast a flickering light through the cracks in the boards, painting the floor in a macabre dance of shadows. The reporter's hand closed around a heavy metal object, a candlestick. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The door creaked open, the hinges protesting with a mournful wail. He braced himself, the candlestick held aloft like a crucifix against the approaching evil. The woman stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the shadows. The reporter held his breath, praying she wouldn't find him. But she did. Her gaze fell upon him, and she tilted her head to the side, a curious smile playing on her lips. "You know the truth," she said, her voice a silky purr that sent shivers down his spine. "You know what I am." The reporter stepped back, the candlestick trembling in his hand. "What do you want from me?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her smile grew wider, revealing a set of teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Your fear," she whispered. "It's delicious." The reporter knew he had only one chance. He swung the candlestick with all his might, aiming for her head. The metal connected with a sickening crunch, and the woman staggered back, the spell on him broken. He didn't wait for her to recover. He bolted through the house, the sound of her enraged snarls fading as he stumbled into the night. The town was still, the silence a stark reminder of the horror that lurked just outside its borders. The reporter knew he had to warn the others, to somehow put an end to the curse that had plagued the town for so long. But first, he had to find the strength to face the creature again, to uncover the secret that had allowed her to prey upon the men of the town for centuries. The woman picked herself up, her eyes burning with a fury that could melt the very stars from the sky. She had tasted the reporter's fear, and it had made her hungry for more. He had escaped, but it was only a matter of time before she found him again. And next time, she would not be so merciful. The reporter's mind raced as he stumbled through the streets, the echoes of his footsteps the only sound in the otherwise silent night. The town's ancient cobblestone alleys twisted and turned like the guts of a labyrinth, offering him no clear path to safety. Each shadow seemed to hold the potential for another encounter with the monstrous beauty, her siren's call ready to lull him into a deadly embrace. As he ran, he noticed that the windows of the houses were all shuttered tight, the signs outside a stark reminder of the curfew that had been imposed. The townsfolk had succumbed to fear, hiding behind their walls like mice in a cat's playground. But the reporter knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to expose the truth and find a way to stop her before she claimed another victim. The clock tower chimed the witching hour, the sound echoing through the deserted streets like a funeral knell. The woman was out there hunting, and the reporter knew he was her prey. He ducked into an alley, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and leaned against the cold stone of a building to gather his thoughts. He had to think logically, to use his wit and courage to survive this horror. He remembered the stories from the archives, the whispers of a creature that had haunted the town for generations. A vampira, a seductress of the night, who feasted on the flesh of men. The town's priests spoke of holy relics that could repel such creatures, and the reporter knew he had to find one before it was too late. He made his way to the local church, his steps as quiet as a ghost's whispers. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, the scent of incense and dust filling his nostrils. His eyes scanned the shadows for any sign of her, his heart pounding like a drum of doom. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls, each one seemingly reaching out to grab him. The church was his sanctuary, the one place he thought she wouldn't dare to tread. But as he reached the altar, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He whirled around, the candlestick held tightly in his grip, ready to strike. But it was only the priest, his eyes wide with terror and his robes stained with sweat. The priest recognized the reporter and gasped. "You must leave," he whispered urgently. "She knows you've seen her true form. She will not rest until she has tasted your fear." The reporter's grip on the candlestick tightened. "I need your help," he pleaded. "I need something to protect me, something to fight her with." The priest nodded, his eyes darting to the cross that hung around his neck. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn vial filled with a shimmering liquid. "Holy water," he murmured. "It's your only hope, but beware. She is cunning and will stop at nothing to get to you." With trembling hands, the reporter took the vial, the weight of the town's fate now resting squarely on his shoulders. He knew that he could not simply hide and wait for dawn. He had to face the vampira and end her reign of terror. The night was still young, and the streets lay before him like a battlefield. He took a deep breath, steeled himself, and stepped back out into the dark, the echo of the priest's warning ringing in his ears. "May God have mercy on your soul," the priest had said, and the reporter couldn't help but wonder if it was a farewell or a curse. He approached the house with the flickering light, his heart racing faster than the galloping hooves of 1,000 nightmares. As he got closer, the sweet, sickening scent of blood wafted towards him, and he had to fight the urge to retch. He peered through the window, his heart in his throat. The sight that met his eyes was a tableau of horror. The woman was there, crouched over a freshly killed man, her teeth and lips stained crimson. Her eyes, those pools of enchantment, were focused intently on something she held in her hand. His eyes followed the line of her gaze to the man's mutilated body. His stomach lurched, and he had to force himself not to look away. The reporter knew he had to act fast. He reached into his pocket and gripped the vial of holy water, his hand shaking like a leaf in a storm. With a silent prayer, he smashed the glass pane and threw the water at the vampira. The liquid made contact, and she recoiled with a shriek that could shatter the very fabric of the night. The woman's eyes snapped open, and she turned to face him, her fury palpable. The reporter stumbled backward, his legs refusing to obey his command to run. But the holy water had weakened her, and she staggered, giving him the precious seconds he needed. He took off down the street, the sound of her pursuit growing fainter with each step. The town was a maze of shadows and whispers, each turn offering a new nightmare. He could feel her presence, a malevolent force that seemed to seep into his very bones. His mind raced as he tried to remember the layout of the streets, searching for a place to hide, a place to wait for the sun. As he turned a corner, he spotted a light in the distance, the town's lone tavern, its windows still aglow with the fading embers of the day. He dashed towards it, the vampira's cries growing distant. He burst through the doors, slammed them shut, and barricaded them with a heavy wooden chair. The tavern was empty, the air stale with the scent of spilled ale and forgotten fears. His eyes searched the dimly lit room, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon. He found a cross on the wall, likely left there by a more hopeful time. He yanked it down, feeling its weight in his hand. It was solid, real. It could be his salvation. The tavern door rattled, and he knew she had found him. The reporter took a deep breath, gripping the cross tightly. He knew he had to be ready to fight, to protect himself and the town from the creature that stalked the night. The shadows grew longer, and the candles flickered, as if in anticipation of the battle to come. The door shuddered, the wood splintering under the vampire's relentless onslaught. With each hit, the reporter could feel the fear rising in his chest, a tide threatening to drown him. But he clung to the cross, whispering prayers under his breath, feeling the warmth of it spread through his body. Suddenly, the door gave way with a deafening crack. The vampira stood in the doorway, her eyes glowing like twin embers of hellfire. The reporter knew that if he didn't act now, he would become just another of her many victims. He raised the cross, his voice trembling as he recited the ancient words that were said to banish such creatures. The vampira hissed, her eyes narrowing in fury. But she didn't advance. Instead, she retreated, the shadows swallowing her up as if she had never been there. The reporter collapsed to his knees, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. He had survived the night, but he knew the battle was far from over. He had seen her true form, and he had tasted her wrath. The town waited for him, huddled behind their locked doors, their faith in him their only shield against the monster in their midst. As dawn approached, the reporter vowed to do whatever it. Elena's heart raced as she sprinted down the moonlit path, the sound of her own breathing echoing in her ears like a siren's call. Her grandmother's house grew smaller in the distance, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The old woman's face, twisted in rage, was seared into her mind's eye, a stark contrast to the gentle expression she had worn just moments ago. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of the lavender her grandmother had always loved. But tonight it seemed to carry a warning, a hint of the horror that had unfolded inside those walls. Her boyfriend, Tom, kept pace beside her, his hand tight around hers, their footsteps sinking as if they'd practiced this escape 100 times. They hadn't spoken since they left, the gravity of their actions weighing down on them like a lead blanket. They had been so careful, so meticulous in their planning. How had it come to this? The night was cool and damp, and a mist clung to their clothes like a second skin. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made Elena jump, expecting to feel her grandmother's cold hand on her shoulder. But the only thing that followed them was the shadow of their guilt, stretching out like a long, dark snake slithering behind them. "You sure you're okay?" Tom finally broke the silence, his voice low and tight. "We had to do it," Elena panted, more to convince herself than him. She was going to tell everyone. The words felt like a lie on her tongue, but the fear was real. The fear of their secret getting out. The fear of the consequences. Their plan had been simple: take what they needed and disappear. The old woman had always had a treasure trove of valuable items, hoarded away like a dragon's hoard. They'd sell it all, start a new life together, far from the whispers and judgments of their small town. But things had gone sideways, and now they were fugitives, the taste of freedom bittersweet in their mouths. Elena glanced back, the house a mere speck in the distance. She could almost feel the eyes of the townspeople upon her, the whispers of accusation already starting. But she pushed the thought away and focused on the path ahead, her pulse pounding in her ears like a drumbeat. The first part of the night had gone perfectly. They'd slipped in after dark, avoiding the neighbors' watchful eyes. Her grandmother had been in the kitchen, humming to herself as she stirred a pot on the stove. The sight of her, so peaceful, had almost made Elena's resolve waver. The Tom had been firm, and the promise of their future together had steeled her. Now, as they stumbled into the welcoming arms of the night, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their escape was too easy, too clean. She had killed the one person who had ever truly loved her, the one person who had raised her since she was a child. The weight of her actions settled in her stomach like a stone. But she didn't have time for regrets. They had to keep moving, had to get as far away as possible before the body was discovered. The town would be searching for them come morning, and they needed a head start. As the miles stretched out before them, Elena clung to Tom's hand, her eyes on the horizon where the moon cast a silver path. They had to keep running. They had to find a way to make this right, or at least, to live with what they had done. But the whispers grew louder, the shadows longer, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their terrible fate was chasing them, one step behind, waiting to pounce. Her grandmother had been frail, but she had raised Elena with a strength that seemed supernatural. The love in her eyes had been pure, untainted by the greed that had consumed Elena and Tom. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison they had escaped, the walls closing in on them, even as they put more distance between themselves and the crime scene. The mist grew thicker, the trees more twisted, as if the very landscape was contorting into a reflection of Elena's own guilt. The path grew treacherous, laden with hidden roots and sudden dips that threatened to send them tumbling. Yet they pushed on, driven by fear and the desperate hope that they could somehow outrun the specter of their past. But the night had other plans. As they stumbled into a small, desolate clearing, Elena felt a sudden coldness seep into her bones. She looked down to see her grandmother's hand, withered and cold, clutching hers. She screamed, trying to pull away, but it was no use. The hand was as real as the day she had held it, and it felt like it had the power to drag her back to the house, back to the judgmental eyes of the woman she had once called Gran. Tom's grip tightened, and he spun her around, his eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" he yelled over the cacophony of her own screams. But as he looked at her, his expression changed from fear to horror. He was holding nothing but air, his hand passing through the spectral grip of Elena's grandmother. The realization hit her like a sledgehammer. She had become a conduit for the wrath she had unleashed. The clearing grew colder, the mist thickening into a swirling maelstrom of icy fingers that clawed at her skin. The whispers grew to a cacophony, the voices of the damned converging on their location. The trees twisted and bent, reaching out for them with gnarled limbs. The moon above them faded, swallowed by a sudden, inexplicable eclipse. Her grandmother's voice, once warm and nurturing, now echoed through the dark, a chilling cackle that sent shivers down Elena's spine. "You cannot escape me, child," it taunted. "I am part of you now, and I will never let you rest." Tom's eyes searched hers, a silent question hanging in the air. They had done the unthinkable, and now they were lost in a nightmare of their own making. With trembling hands, he pulled her closer, whispering, "We'll figure this out, we're in this together." But the words were drowned out by the rising crescendo of the haunting laughter, the chilling embrace of the night tightening around them, signaling the beginning of their never-ending horror. The trees grew closer, their branches twisting into the shapes of contorted figures, pointing and jeering at the young lovers. The once comforting scent of lavender now suffocated Elena, a noose of guilt tightening around her neck. Her grandmother's hand grew stronger, the icy grip seeping through her very soul. She could feel the warmth of life draining from her, replaced by the cold, unyielding embrace of the grave. Panic gripped her, and she tried to pull away, but it was like fighting the tides. The more she struggled, the stronger the spectral hand became, its grip unbreakable. She could see the fear in Tom's eyes as he realized that her fate was now their fate, that they had unleashed something that could not be outrun or outsmarted. It was a force that knew their every move before they did, a curse that had latched onto them and would not let go. Suddenly, the clearing was bathed in an eerie blue light, and a figure emerged from the mist, tall, skeletal, with a tattered shawl fluttering in the non-existent breeze. It was her grandmother, or what was left of her. Her eyes burned with a cold fire, and her mouth was a gaping maw, her laughter a symphony of the damned. Elena's legs gave way beneath her, and Tom caught her, his own strength failing him as they stared into the abyss of their folly. The ground beneath them began to shake, the earth groaning in protest at their very presence. The spectral figures grew bolder, their whispers turning to screams that pierced the air like shards of ice. The trees bent and thrashed, their roots snaking out to entrap them. Alina knew that this was not the end of the night, but the end of their lives as they knew it. The love she had once felt for her grandmother had become a twisted, vengeful force that would hound them until their last breath. The figure of her grandmother grew larger, looming over them, the hand reaching out to claim her. Tom tried to shield her, but he was no match for the supernatural. The last thing Alina saw was the cold, unforgiving gaze of the woman she had once called Gran. The world around them faded to black, and she knew that she had made a pact with darkness that she could never escape. The price of their greed was a fate worse than any prison, a perpetual torment that would haunt them until the end of their days. And as the earth swallowed them whole, Alina's final thought was not of the treasure they had sought, but of the love they had abandoned. The love that had been her grandmother's gift, now transformed into an eternal punishment that would never release its hold. They had killed for a future together, but instead they had earned a future of pain, forever bound to the very thing they had destroyed. The world around them was now a prison of her own making, a reflection of the guilt that consumed her. Every tree, every leaf, every droplet of dew was a mirror, reflecting back the face of the monster she had become. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of accusations and despair that filled the air, a symphony of her own regret. Her grandmother's ghostly hand grew colder, the chill spreading through Alina's body, freezing her heart and mind. She could feel the life draining from her, the warmth of Tom's embrace the only semblance of comfort in the face of the endless winter that awaited them. They were lost, not just in the woods, but in the labyrinth of their own making, a maze with no exit. Tom's eyes searched hers, a silent apology in his gaze. They had been so blinded by their desire for more that they had ignored the value of what they already had. The warmth of their love now seemed like a distant memory, a flickering candle in the dark abyss of their new reality. The ground beneath them trembled, a reminder that they were not alone in this forsaken place. The trees closed in, the shadows reaching out like skeletal fingers, eager to claim them as their own. The figure of Alina's grandmother grew larger still, the tattered shawl billowing around her like the sails of a ghostly ship. The hand reached down, the cold touch of death itself, and Alina knew that she could not escape. Her grandmother had loved her unconditionally, and in return, she had taken that love and twisted it into something monstrous. The screams grew deafening, the voices of the damned mingling with her own. Tom's arms tightened around her, his warmth a beacon in the cold embrace of the supernatural. But it was too late. The hand closed around her, and she was torn from his grasp, pulled into the void. The light from the moon, the comfort of the night sky, all of it was gone, replaced by the icy embrace of the spirit world. Alina's heart shattered as she was dragged away, the last remnants of her humanity slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. She had killed for freedom, but instead she had found a prison of the soul, a place where the only companion was the unyielding grip of guilt and the eternal torment of her grandmother's wrath. The clearing fell away, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness. The trees, the whispers, the ground, everything she knew was gone. All that remained was the icy grip, the burning eyes of the specter, and the cold, unyielding knowledge that she would never be free. Her grandmother's voice echoed through the void, a never-ending chant of her own name, a reminder of the love that had been destroyed and the price she had paid. Their fate was sealed. They had killed for a dream, but in the end, they had only found a nightmare that would never release them. The warmth of their love had turned to ash, consumed by the cold flames of greed. And as Alina's eyes closed, she knew that the only thing that awaited her was the eternal, icy embrace of the woman who had once held her in her warm, loving arms. The woman she had betrayed in the most unspeakable way. The woman who had become the monster that would haunt her forever. Tom watched, helpless, as Elena was pulled away, his screams echoing through the clearing. The coldness seeped into his bones, the very air around him turning frigid. He knew that he would never see her again, never feel the warmth of her touch, never hear the sweet sound of her laughter. The darkness grew thicker, the whispers of the dam swirling around him like a maelstrom of despair. But the night had one last twist. As Elena disappeared into the void, Tom felt a sudden brutal wrench. He was torn from the ground, his body contorting in ways it shouldn't. The pain was unbearable, a scream ripping from his throat. The trees around him reached out, their branches snaking around him like vines, holding him tight. He was trapped, bound to the very earth he had hoped to flee. The ground beneath him began to crack, the fissures spreading like spider webs. He was being dragged down into the cold embrace of the earth, into the very bowels of the place he had hoped to leave behind. The whispers grew louder, the voices of the damned chanting his name alongside Elena's. They were one in their suffering now, forever linked by the terrible deed they had done. As the earth swallowed him whole, Tom could see the ghostly figure of Elena's grandmother standing above, her skeletal hand raised in triumph. The last thing he heard before the blackness closed in was the sound of her cackling laughter, the final, chilling note in the symphony of their doom. He had thought they could escape, but the bonds of love and loyalty had become the chains that held them fast, chains that would never be broken, not even by death. The coldness of the earth seeped into his very marrow, turning his body into a living ice sculpture. The whispers grew fainter as he descended, the world above a distant memory. The only warmth was the anger that burned in his heart, a fire that would never be extinguished by the freezing embrace of the grave. But even in the darkest corners of the earth, Tom felt a flicker of hope. The love he had for Elena still burned, a beacon in the abyss. He knew that somehow, someway, they would find each other again, even if it meant fighting their way out of the very depths of hell itself. The walls of the grave closed in around him, the dirt pressing against his skin like the cold grip of the undying. But he did not succumb to the panic that threatened to consume him. Instead, he focused on the warmth of the memories they had shared, the moments that had made them believe that their love was worth dying for. And as he lay there, trapped in the cold earth, he made a silent vow to find her, to free her from the curse that had claimed them both. The whispers grew faint, the world of the living a distant memory. But Tom's determination did not wane. He would not rest until they were together again, even if it meant eternal torment at the hands of the very woman they had so callously wronged. The love that had driven them to this fate was now their only salvation, the thread that connected their shattered souls. And as the darkness swallowed him completely, he knew that he would follow that thread, no matter where it led. Days, or perhaps weeks, passed in the timeless abyss of the underworld. Elena wandered the desolate landscape, the icy grip of her grandmother's hand never leaving her. The spectral figures that had once been trees now stared at her with the vacant eyes of the long dead, their whispers a constant reminder of her crime. The cold seeped into every pore, a never-ending reminder of the warmth she had lost. Yet she pressed on, driven by the fading ember of hope that still burned in her heart. Tom, trapped in the earth, felt the slow crawl of time as his body began to decay. His thoughts, however, remained sharp, fueled by the rage that burned in his soul. He would not accept this fate, not without a fight. With every shiver that racked his body, he swore to find Elena, to free her from this endless nightmare. The love that had brought them together would be the key to their salvation, no matter the cost. In the realm of the living, the townsfolk searched in vain for the missing couple. The house stood silent, the kitchen a tableau of a meal never eaten, the pot still simmering on the stove. But the whispers grew stronger, the shadows longer, until even the bravest of souls dared not approach. It was as if the very air was thick with the scent of their fear, a testament to the horrors that had been unleashed. The nights grew colder, the moon a mournful spectator in the sky above. The whispers grew to a crescendo, a symphony of pain that could be heard for miles. Yet amidst the chaos, Elena and Tom clung to the memory of their love, the warmth of their hearts a beacon in the icy dark. And as the veil between worlds grew thin, they reached out to each other, their spirits entwined by a bond stronger than death itself. In that moment, a spark of hope ignited in the depths of despair. They could feel each other's presence, the echo of their love resonating through the void. With every beat of their trapped hearts, the whispers grew weaker, the chill of the grave less bitter. They had found a way to fight back against the curse that held them. A flick,